because I'd like to invite our four speakers to the fore. So we're going to open up for a conversation, and we also want to bring in the audience, sort of subjected a little bit into a passive position. So it's hard to see you guys. Yeah, I'll open up in a minute. So Sven, I think, already started with a run-through and a bit of a wrap-up, taking us back to where we began this afternoon with our Aegiacarian origins and this wonderful film that I had no clue about, which brings a proposition of hope. Then onwards to Rada's 5 fictions and the need to wash our brains, and of course also the question of yes, we know all this, and why don't we then practice it, or doesn't have a more of an effect. Then to TJ's very dark analysis of the radical undoing of life that we see taking place. And Nulliver's alternative practice, very important to have here. Although you do say it feels awkward, I think it's extremely important to have your story here. We had a little chat in the break, and I told Nulliver that I'm teaching on violence and conflict all the time. And at a certain point, I thought, am I not sort of completely ruining this young generation with all these horror stories about catastrophe and war? And I talked to somebody whose work is in pedagogy, and you know how young people learn and what it does to their minds. And he said, yes, young people, children too, but I think it counts for all of us. We can take a lot of ugly stuff, but you always have to bring in an aspect of hope in every story you tell. Otherwise, we just shut off. Your brain can't take it. You don't learn if there's no narrative, if there's no, at least some sort of perspective brought into your lecture. So, and I'm very happy to have seen, although we would talk about analysis and critique, we see also already quite a number of more hopeful propositions that I think tomorrow is going to be much more about. So what can we do now here, standing here, the 5 of us, in half an hour? Everybody's hungry and tired, perhaps. So what can we do now? And I think one of the things that we can do is talk about terminology. What have we learned in these past hours? What insights about this notion of propagandas that, you know, Jonas is proposing to us as perhaps useful? Can we distill from the 4 propositions? How is propaganda defined? How is it understood? What analytical vocabularies, what terminologies strike you as important here? What did you learn? What do you want to take with you? And what do you see in terms of a conversation? It's also a question to you 4. And what is propagated? How and why do these propagandas resonate as regimes of truth? How do they operate differently? And how are they manufactured and put to work in different ways? And then again, how is it that they do their work and they continue to do their work so well? And what can we learn from that? And then the end question is, how do we relate to this? We can critique it, we can refute it, debunk it, ridicule it. We can hide in communities of rebellion and comradeship. But what can we learn in using propaganda and propagating otherwise? So these are a lot of questions. I want to open up the floor first, maybe in terms of terminologies to the 4 speakers, but also after that really want to see and draw you in. How we're going to organize bringing in your voices. Is there somebody with a mic? Okay, so be very clear, raising your hand, and then we'll get a mic to you. But I first want to give the floor to our speakers to speak to each other. So who would like to pick up? Yeah, there. Yes, go ahead.
What I found very inspiring was the way that you used brainwashing in a positive sense. Yeah? Like, why don't we actively and consciously wash our brains, yeah, and wash it of all these residues of the education that we received. And in the same way that that Jonas Staal has always also been using propaganda a little bit in a positive, like an agent, we can actually actively decide. Especially as an artist, since the artist cannot escape his role as a propagandist, to actually give it a positive message. And I just wanted to add one thing to it, like in terms of terminology about conspiracy, is that I also found, like I've traveled a lot, and I found that in a lot of countries where I've been working, which are usually war countries, the people have like developed lots of conspiracy theories. And the reason for that is that they're trying to make sense of the world that they're in. Yeah, they're trying to make sense why are foreign armies invading our countries. I mean, this whole argument of bringing human rights and democracy doesn't seem to make any sense at all. So they're looking actively. They're trying to construct a kind of image of the world which does make sense. Yeah, so that's just one point on the terminology thing.
I have a question that maybe could open something up, and it has to do with words that were used. So Sven, I noticed you talked about terror. So the terror of fascism or the terror of the Western supremacy, but I think it struck me that we're also in a moment where we're having to redefine what terror means, because there's as Rada had said, you know, the dark side of the moon, the light side of the moon, there's also terrorism, which is often a euphemism for resistance, depending on the context. And then the other question is liberal or illiberal. When was the West ever liberal? And is liberalism, what truly is liberalism if the nation state was a Western contract that effectively became an engine of colonization? So are we really talking about liberalism here?
Okay, so let's take one more question from the audience, and then it's time to reflect. Yes, right in the middle.
My question would be the overlap between, I'm not sure if Nilofer is engaged in genealogy, but probably you are aware of the practical way of looking to female studies in genealogy. I don't know if I pronounce it well. And then you have art and you have law, and so in what way can you have an overlap and learn from each other?
It's a jam session, so see what you want to think. I want to end this session with a bit more clarity on the terms we think are useful to take with us. So maybe with that in mind.
Perhaps briefly on liberalism. Indeed, I mean, I would say that this is also part of Achille Mbembe's project, let's say, with elaborating the notion of necropolitics. I mean, there's clearly a very largely indirect, but nonetheless fairly clear sort of critical rejection there of a whole sort of framework of late liberalist theorizing a la Habermas, right? It's very much also a kind of, let's say, deconstruction and debunking of this kind of recent sort of theoretical liberalism, the whole idea of the spread of liberal democracy around the world, the idea that this would be something that would be welcomed by others because hey, we're bringing you liberal democracy, but the people in question know full well that liberalism has always been based on these sort of constitutive exclusions, right? And liberalism has always been liberalism for some and sort of necropolitics for others, right? So yes, this is ultimately what, why this narrative is now also increasingly, I think, breaking down even in the West, right? Because this is, these constitutive exclusions and these sort of constitutive violence of liberalism, it can no longer really be swept under the carpet.
I'm sure Rada wants to follow up on that.
Okay, I will try and just add to that. When you posed that question, I was thinking, okay, now she's trying to wash her brain, because this idea that liberalism has ever been benign is something uniquely, again, limited to Europe. Our idea of liberalism the memory goes back very long. And it's not just book memory. It is a story of our families. It is a story of our, ancestors. For example, when I talk about East India Company, there is a corporation entity there. But they confiscated the lands of our ancestors. This is real. My great-grandfather, 1804, they confiscated our land. And they punished us. Why? Because we fought against the East India Company. So these are not things that are learned from the book. So what happens in our case is we inhabit two worlds. When we go home, we listen to these stories from our grandparents, from our great-grandparents, and they tell us story, this happened, that happened, how we lost our land and how it was, etc., etc. When we come to university, when we go to school, we learn about liberalism, right? So we inhabit these two worlds. And when these two worlds can't be matched, and we cannot go on pretending that there is only one world, then there is a crisis. There's an intellectual crisis, there is a theoretical crisis, there is a political crisis, and then we need to rethink how to negotiate this and how to make sense of the fact that on the one hand, we are told that we are liberal, on the other hand, this problem does not exist for many Europeans and therefore in the Anglo or Euro-American context, it involves self-reflection. It doesn't come automatically from your life. You don't have to tell a Ghanaian about slave trade and what it is. They know that. So in this case, and therefore that education, and therefore the realization that I talked about, the extent to which we have internalized this. I find this even for things like corporation and legal entities, because my grandmother would say, oh, that is the devil in action, because you don't create a human person. The fact that you do it is a devil in action, according to her. Now, of course, I don't say that, because the devil has many meanings in another cultural context. But in the European context, it goes back to the church, which was the first entity. And it was supposed to be there because God is immortal. So we need an organization that keeps immortality.
Rada, I feel like you laid the ground to confront this idea of terror, right? Because I'm curious about the usage, and it struck me, Sven, it just struck me when you said, terror in the context of eco-fascism. But of course, we've been hearing a lot about this word, and I think at the moment words are either they're losing meaning or they're recuperating their initial meaning. But I wonder, when you talked about the East India Company fighting against it, we have the two sides of terror, right?
Yes.
I wonder if you could elaborate. But I kind of want to almost collapse this word. Is it the right word? Do we need to use other terms? And it's the same for liberalism. I don't think we're talking about liberalism when we're talking about liberalism.
No.
And when we're talking about the West, we're not talking about democracy, ever.
No, we are not, because this is why I said the dark side and the bright side. What you're saying is only the bright side exists. What we are saying is, no, look at us. We can show you the dark side. And same thing with genocide. Genocide did not start with Palestine. It's been going on since 1492, as far as I know. you know, and it's been one genocide. I mean, in our lifetimes, how many genocides have we seen? Yeah, we've seen the Tamil genocide, we have seen the Rwandan genocide, we have seen, you know, it's been going on in front of our eyes in our generation, just one generation. But every time a genocide happens, we are told this is the first time and how terrible it is. And then there are facts. This is why I referred to facts and information and data. You have endless data. Another genocide now will start somewhere or the other. And then this, already Palestine is no longer headline news. Already in the last 2 weeks, right? And then we've gone to something else. So I think that this disconnected way of thinking, that is why the 5 fictions become so central to the whole thinking. It's not about going from one genocide to the next, but it is about recognizing that this modern civilization is founded on genocide. It cannot exist without genocide. Let us not bluff ourselves.
So
and
here,
I guess
yeah.
the point, I'll just make one more last point. We are living, and the reason why I emphasize this is because we are living at a time when the old is not working. We need to stop clinging on to it. And sometimes people say, what is the practical value of this? No, when we wash our brains, then we'll come out cleaner for it.
Thank you. Yeah, so I think that we take an important step here by looking at this word liberalism and seeing what it means and what it doesn't mean, and positioning it you know, thinking it out of our provincial, or the Western provincial perspective. And at the same time, that is a very exciting, it's a time of crisis, because we start doubting and washing our words. And I think the intervention was, in that sense, a beautiful reference to all that. So we're rethinking the terms that we live by. So these are wonderful questions. Thank you for asking them and giving Radha the opportunity to answer them in this way. And we have to find new ways to propagate what other terms we can use, or what we can learn from these new unpackings. And I think also we're at this moment where we move from a unipolar to a multipolar world, which is also, could be very exciting if we're willing to make that shift as the West, and not try and destroy everything around us, because we can't deal with the idea that we're not, you know, we can't go out and kill off everyone who's not abiding to our philosophies. So to be in this movement from unipolar to multipolar is also a wonderful opportunity, but we have to be self-critical and realize where we are and in what kind of context we operate. So again, we need new words and we need frames of understanding. So anyone from the panel who'd like to pick up on how we do this? Yeah.
I think in case of liberalism, because I think liberalism is the main obstacle in using the opportunities in the multipolar politics now, because we have now condition of chaos, and in these circumstances the rulers can't rule in our region, and those who have been ruled don't like to be ruled anymore. So this is the golden opportunity to make the shift, the change. But for that, we have to overcome the sicknesses of liberalism, which is individualism, is preventing us for collective struggle. I think the main problem of individualism is, in Europe, making the life tasty for capitalism, particularly being individualistic. And to overcome the opposite system, you need to build your system in collective structures. So that's why I think this is the right time to be critical to the fancy word of liberalism. So that's, in that I agree, because otherwise we will lose the opportunity. This is the opportunity now for the 99%, I would say. Because we have been discovering the truth face of all those who are committing suicide, genocide, ecocide and feminicide. So we have seen this in Gaza, we have seen this in Kurdistan and elsewhere. So we haven't been talking about what's happening on the Philippines, what is happening in Bangladesh, in African continent. There's a shift everywhere. So the whole world is shaking now, and I think we are moving to the Third World War. So, and this is a word we have to deal with also, the Third World War. It's different in the character when you compare with the First and Second World. It's more, at the same time, there are several wars, conflicts everywhere. But all the wars are against the societies. So, and I think this is a time of the societies to be organized in their diversity, with a democratic understanding of accepting pluralism of the society. It's possible, I think. And then also taking over the question about genealogy, I will then add to Rada. Genealogy is actually also a science of women to clean the brain from patriarchy. It's also brainwashing. So it's cleaning all the parts of science, whether biology, physics, religion, history, from patriarchal understanding, and also giving back the science to sociology, to the society. That's why genealogy means the freedom of sociology, which means that everything what we are talking about as a human achievements, including science. Science is not the elite issue. Science is not the issue of just universities, academies. It belongs to the society. Genealogy is trying to give it back to the society. Not having class structures in the world of academy, of science. So this is the duty of genealogy, and also dealing or taking advantage from Descartes, from Bacon, from all those who have been serving the mindset of capitalism by saying the state, God, the ruling class as a subject, and we as the humans are poor and objects. So your genealogy is dealing with all of that, and it has the academy, which is also building up a new understanding of pedagogy in the kindergarten, from the kindergarten until to the universities and academies. In Rojava, for example, genealogy is responsible for this, for all the schools, including universities, and in the primary schools, for example, they have achieved that the children shouldn't get notes. No notes for the children, because notes are pressuring the children. For example, one of the achievements of new pedagogy in our region. And also looking for the materials which are taught in the universities in Rojava. This is genealogy, it's intervention in patriarchy in brain.
Who'd like to share something, an insight, something you've learned? It doesn't always have to be a
I already have the mic.
So where?
I'm here.
Where?
Right in front of
right
you.
In front, yeah,
right in front of you.
Bright.
You don't see me through the light. That's of course a metaphor. Yeah. I was wondering, we may need new terms and a vocabulary, but don't we rather need new narratives? And I think I've heard already two today. And one is the narrative of the 99%, and the other one of the matrilineal way of life. So more the narrative, and I think you mentioned this yourself, then again, new words, because words also need narratives. Open door, but still.
I think we can agree on that. That's a valid point. Thanks for that. Anyone who wants to pick up, DJ?
Yeah, thank you for that. In responding, I don't want to propose anything like a dualism or opposition, but I've been thinking recently, like it's becoming, it seems increasingly important to shift from the train of words and narratives and ideas toward the real question of how to build power against the forces of fascism. Right? Like, how can we organize and develop forms of solidarity to empower ourselves to stop the catastrophic destruction of life in general? So again, I'm not saying that words don't matter or that ideas, narratives, storytelling, clearly that remains important, and we're standing amidst an amazing set of genealogies here of stories and ideas that are ready to be mobilized in all sorts of ways. But I think really the question that is so crucial right now is how can we organize? Like how can we build power to stop the forces of destruction? You know, in that sense, maybe we have to bring some self-criticality in terms of our own positionality within an academic and artistic context. Like how can we reach out to build a majoritarian movement, including people that have been excluded from spaces like this for so long? Certainly this is a question where I come from the University of California and the States in general. Like how can we break up the hold on leftist discourse by a professional managerial class and build a new kind of working class, majoritarian, diverse, anti-racist and anti-imperialist movement?
Yeah, Reda? I see you want to respond. No, go ahead.
I'll say something about narratives. Yeah, I think narratives are absolutely central to human understanding of the world. But the question is, what kind of narratives? Yeah, narratives have always been used in other countries and societies and cultures to show us an insight into some human truth or essence of human life, some reality about human life. Yeah. For example, if you take, I don't know, I'm thinking of what I can give, Aesop's fables, for example, or many of those kind of stories, they always had a moral at the end of it. But these narratives that we are seeing, for example, see the narrative on genocide, never again. Now you say, no, never again, but only for the Jewish people, you know, not for the others. But we talk about universalism. So there is no story, there is no narrative there. We think it is a narrative. We think it is a narrative because of the fictions that we have been told. But there is no narrative in the real sense that gives us some insight into the nature of human life, into the nature of intergenerationality, for example, the need for regeneration. You know, all those things that our grandmother's stories told us, that is no longer there. So this is not a narrative, according to me, because a narrative must be able to reconstruct yourself. And I'll just say one more thing about this. In South Asia, generally, and parts of Middle East and other places, we have this tradition of the philosopher poets from about, say, 10th century AD till about the early 20th century. And what these philosopher poets did was they wrote philosophy in poetry and song. Why? Because the ordinary people, and these were rebel philosophers, obviously, because the educated ones wrote in Sanskrit and wrote in, you know, all the languages which no ordinary people, like Latin, nobody speaks that. And the reason they did that was because they said, and this leads to the question of power, that don't worry about power, because you need to worry about your self-rule and your self-determination. When you assert that, and that has to come from you, from the community, from the people, and when you take care of that, power you can deal with, it will come, it will follow. So they focus through their songs, through their poetry, which even today people sing. If you go to a protest demonstration in India, for example, on Dalits, you will have poetry from Namdev and Tukaram, 16th century, 15th century. They sing these songs. And what that does is it keeps the spirit of resistance alive. The problem I find in liberal societies, the spirit of resistance is broken completely. So people can only think of resisting intellectually. And that is the fundamental thing. But the reason I want to add to Nilofer's thing about how do communities keep this It is transmitted through an alternate way that is easy, that is comprehensible, that is not too academic, that is simple to understand. And people sing these songs, they perform these things every year. You know, it's part of the whole cultural milieu. So it's a spirit of resistance that we need to worry about, I would say.
Thanks so much, Radha. And then perhaps to wrap it up, perhaps then these type of gatherings in our Western society are those places where we try and narrate and find words and listen to, you know, these types of wisdoms where and take these serious and you know, act upon them, because indeed that is the biggest problem. And I think with that I bridge to a last comment from. No, I do want to wrap up. A last, who do you point to?
The mic has been given to someone to ask a question.
Okay.
We cannot
We cannot untake
untake the mic.
the mic. Well, there goes my bridge. Go ahead.
It's not on.
Just keep on talking, then it will. Yeah, go ahead.
I was just wanting to make a remark on the setup of this gathering, which points also to what establishes agency in a divisionary, disciplinary sense, how we are divided up in the division of labor under capitalism, which assigns certain affordances and certain kinds of modalities of how we work. We saw this division of labor in display by the politicians not being able to draw, and the critical theorists limiting themselves to debunking existing ideologies. But how to gain agency between them, between those limited agencies we have within disciplines, we need to first be talking to one another, I would suggest, in order to gain agency and to find out what is limiting agency amongst us. That's what I wanted to say.
Thanks. I think I go back to my bridge on practice and the need for practice. And I give Jonas the last word.
It's a very short note following on what TJ mentioned, that how we bring the very specific terms that you brought to the table into practice. Because in this room we have here on stage Nilüfer. She's also one of the key figures in the Freedom for Öcalan Peace in Kurdistan campaign. It's a campaign you can join today. It's a campaign that fights for the release of Abdullah Öcalan, one of the revolutionary leaders and thinkers, based on whose ideas the movement was able to develop across these past decades, that needs our urgent support and attention in the room. And we will hear tomorrow from Varsha Gandikota, one of the co-coordinators of Progressive International, one of the largest umbrella organizations that exists in the world today, that is trying to establish a new 21st century international, of which the Kurdistan National Congress is one of its many members, trade unions, progressive political parties, yes, progressive political parties, indigenous nations, an attempt to coordinate across a variety of different political organizations. You can become a member today and a co-organizer. Today we have here the National Democratic Front of the Philippines. We will hear of one of its founding members, Julie de Lima, tonight, which operates amongst others from Utrecht, together with an amazing network of cultural workers that is always open for people to join, to partake, to bring cultural imaginaries to their political campaign. After the break, we will participate in a collective training by two artists, cultural workers from the Laboratory for Insurrectionary Imagination that operate in the ZAD autonomous zone that has battled across the last 15 years to maintain a self-organized community. We will speak with members from the Counterpower Coalition, from Woonopstand, the housing rebellion in the Netherlands, to XR Justice now, to say we have all the organizations here that can bring all of these terms into practice. They need our support, they need our membership. It's the only way we bridge what doesn't have to be a gap, what we do today between what we discuss here and what we need to bring into practice.
Beautiful, thank you. Okay, I want to thank our speakers.